Hi everyone, I'm Andy Brown, and today I'm going to be delivering a session on effective CPD, looking at generic practices and arguing if they're effective or not, and trying to move towards a more specific model of CPD. So, before I start, I just want you to look at the question from David Weston and Bridget Clay's book, Unleashing Great Teaching. And it's a really interesting thought, isn't it? So I'd argue, and this is an argument for myself, quite often a school's focus is on the student, and rightly so. That's the kind of main aim of education. But if we're looking at effective use of time, is developing a teacher a more sensible way to go? So improving a teacher will affect hundreds of students within their classes, and so I think it's a fair argument to say that we need to be considering the effort we're putting into our teachers and maybe considering the overall efficiency of maybe 1, 2, 3 hours with one student as opposed to that same amount of time with one teacher who would then be able to use those improvements to affect the education of many, many students. So, what do I want from today? So, takeaways from today. Firstly, an understanding of our CPD model and the decisions behind the model. And then secondly, some ideas on how to improve CPD in your own school. So this is a researchED event. So we've, of course, first should go to the research. And this is pretty much where I started. So we're looking at how to improve our CPD offer. So what does the research say? So firstly, I came across the Wellcome Trust Developing Great Teaching report, and it stated the following. Okay, so we're starting to say, well, subject-specific CPD seems to be something which is coming into my thinking. And then the Teacher Development Trust 2015 report stated, and the more I read, the more the idea of subject-specific CPD came up. And it really then started to make me think, well, maybe this is the way we need to go. So how do we do that? Well, before we introduced the model, a big part of my thinking was, well, how do we get teacher buy-in? So we've now established that we think subject-specific CPD is important and more effective. So how do we get buy-in? Well, Dan Pink suggested that there are 3 drivers to motivation. And as we're going through this presentation, I want you to hold on to these 3 concepts and think about how they are delivered through our new CPD model. The first one, mastery. So how does our CPD model improve teachers' ability to practice? How does our CPD model improve their ability to teach? Secondly, autonomy. How does our model give them the independence and the freedom to be in charge of their own destiny? And then lastly, how does our CPD model help them with their purpose? Now, I'd argue most teachers' purpose is to deliver a great education to the students under their control. And so how does our model help them in that purpose to improve the knowledge and the understanding of students within their classes? So what makes effective CPD? So first concept is that it needs to be sustained and repeated. So we don't want to see a one-stop shop. We need it to be repeated throughout the year, and we need it to be something which lasts longer than one session. It needs to have impact over information given, and this makes me think of Dylan Williams' quotation, which was, we need to change what teachers do, not what they know. And I know I've definitely been guilty of this in the past. Coming back from a CPD session, buzzing with ideas, buzzing with some amazing things I want to put into my practice. The weekend goes by, I go to my first class and all of it just disappears. And I continue doing what I've always done. And I think this is a big part of CPD. We need to, where possible, make it really, really easy for our teachers to implement ideas into their own practice. It needs to be weaved across the year. So as you're designing this, how are you going to make this constantly come back into the teacher's mind? And how are you going to give them the opportunity to assess how is it gone? Is it working? Is it not working? How can I adapt it, or how can I change it? Because if it needs to be weaved across the year, we need to be given signposts and moments where teachers can assess how their CPD is going, so they can have this being weaved throughout the year. And lastly, it needs to have a clear focus on pupil learning and less about tick boxes, essentially. So sometimes CPD can fall into the trap of just being, you need to do this, 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 and this. And whilst that can be useful for certain things, I'd argue a lot of CPD sometimes can fall into the trap of just being, you need to do this, as opposed to, the reason we're doing this is because it will improve the outcomes of our students. And that essentially needs to be one of the key drivers of anything we're doing in our profession. So lastly, this came from this book, Unleashing Great Teaching by David Weston and Bridget Clay. And I'd suggest it to anyone who's interested in designing or changing their CPD model. It was central to everything I put in place. It was the first book I went to, and it's a book which I constantly go back to. It's brilliant. So, our model. So this was our previous model. This is the model I've experienced in every school I've ever worked at, and I believe this is a model which is typical of most schools across the country. So most schools have 5 CPD days or 5 inset days, whatever you want to call them, and quite often those 5 days are whole school based. So you're in a hall listening to a form of information being given, and this is spread out across the year. Our model looks a little bit different, but this was the model which I inherited when I first came to the school. I decided to change that model to this. So now our CPD model has 3 strands. Whole school is still there and really important, and I'll explain why in a moment. But we also now have a faculty level strand and an individual level strand. And these 2 strands are where we start to access maybe the specific nature of our CPD model and how it can relate to not only the subject, but the individual taking or having that CPD. So what does it look like? So how do we get those 3 strands? Well, most schools have 5 days, often spread out throughout the year. Our 2 whole school days this year fell on September the 5th, so your first day back is often an important whole school day to welcome everyone back and maybe share some key messages. And then we also had a whole school day on the 18th, and I'm going to tell you what happened there. But this is probably the most important part to get your head around now. So typically a school may have a CPD day on the first day back in January, and they may have one around March. We don't. So you don't come into school on those 2 days. So most schools will have an inset day on the first day back. Our teachers stay at home. They do not come in. And that's the same for the CPD day in March. And what essentially that does for us is it gives us 2 days back. So it gives us 2 days in lieu. And with that in mind, we ask our teachers to think about what could they do to improve their own practice. And I'm going to explain that further as we go through the PowerPoint. And then lastly, often the last CPD day in the calendar we give to faculties. And this is often an opportunity to evaluate the year and maybe work out what they want to do, how they want to improve certain parts of their department. And it's important to know with this, this is fully in control. This is fully organised by the department, and they are given a budget to decide how to deliver this. So it could be inviting a speaker in, it could be buying some resources, it could be having a piece of online training, but it's totally up to them, and they design that final day. And I'll again explain that as we go through. So, whole school. So a whole school model, a whole school strand. So a deputy head who I worked under once said this to me, and it's stuck with me ever since. So if you have 70 teachers in the room for 6 hours, It's 420 hours of time. If you're going to do that, what you deliver has to be effective, and it has to be useful. What it can't be is just an information giving day or a generic day which has no benefit to most of the teachers in that room. But there are times when we do need whole school, and I'm going to share those with you now. So what does our whole school look like? We have 2 days, remember? So often it's core priorities of the school. Now, one obvious one for whole school is statutory training. So safeguarding, health and safety, etc., etc. But these are statutory and they need to be completed. So it would make sense for some of your whole school time to be pointed in this direction. And with our other day, well, these are the two areas that we decided to focus on. So boys don't try and dual coding. We asked Mark Roberts to do a session for us on boys don't try. And the reason for that was one of our whole school priorities was boys attainment. In all subjects across our school, we saw our boys perform worse than our girls. And because of that, we thought, well, that would make sense as something to look at further. So we had a reading session on it where we read a few chapters from the book and we discussed within faculties. And then we asked Mark Roberts to do a session for us so we could maybe ask some questions about exactly what we would do in certain situations. But that's the key point. Boys attainment was an issue for all of our teachers. And so if we can do whole school training, let's make sure it's something which all of our teachers will find useful. And in that case, they did. Secondly, was dual coding. So we asked teachers about what was an area in the science of learning which they felt unsure on. And dual coding was the one that the teachers decided was the one area that they didn't feel confident on. And so following our mantra, if we're going to have everyone in a room, it needs to be really effective. Well, we invited Oliver Caviglioli in, and he delivered a session on dual coding in our school. And I can honestly say that the impact of that has been incredible. Dual coding is now something that all our teachers are really confident on, and you see it constantly throughout the school when you're walking the school. So again, something which all of our teachers found really, really useful. A quick note on that, though, which is probably really important that I shouldn't forget, is when designing this session and explaining to Oliver what we wanted, he said that there was only one department who might not find part of the session useful, and that was the maths department. Now, we have a clear mantra at this school, which we want it to be useful for everyone at all times. So for that session, we arranged for a maths specialist to come in and deliver visible maths, Peter Matlock. And he did a session for our maths department separate to Oliver Caviglioli, because again, we don't want our maths teachers sat in a room for no reason. Okay, so probably the more abstract part of the model would be our individual level. So we know that subject-specific CPD is important for pupil outcomes, and so how can we look at this from an individual level? Now, when I talk about subject specific, I'm talking about the actual lesson, but I think it's really important to discuss how I actually interpret this. And I also interpret this as specific in terms of your needs. So it could be, for example, in trying to improve behavior management. And that is something which I encompassed into subject specific. So what's it look like? So hopefully you now understand they've got 2 days back. So they have 2 days which are flexible. They don't come into school, so now they've got 2 days in lieu as such. And these are the kind of things which we found our teachers attending. So attending researchEDs, brewEDs, New Voices, West London Free Schools History Conference, Geography Icons. We also had a few of our teachers do school visits. You often find that schools in different boroughs, so Leicester, for example, compared to Birmingham, have different term dates. So it gives you the opportunity to go visit a school in your half term, and that's one of the days that you can use in lieu. But what this allowed us to do is access the wealth of CPD that is out there. But more importantly, we're not asking now teachers to give up their own time. We are giving teachers a day back. And so it could be argued that now these are going to these sessions in school time. We pay for all these sessions, and because it's part of their inset day, they're actually getting a wage for the day to attend these sessions. So it's really important that we kind of grasp the idea that we're not asking them now to go in their own time. With a day back in lieu, they're actually going on our time. But a question which has been raised before is, well, Saturdays are great, but people have families and not everyone wants to give up their Saturdays. And we totally understand that. So we also offer twilight sessions. So there are teach meets, there are some amazing webinars going on. There are afternoon CPD sessions. I know the West Midlands Knowledge Hub does some great sessions after schools. Reading, moderations. But the point is that we don't have a mandate for our teachers to do so many Saturdays or do so many twilights. They can choose. And so we have some teachers who would rather do 2 Saturdays. We have some teachers who would only rather do after school twilights. And we're fine with that. We guide them to how many hours they need to complete based on the days they've had back, and how they choose to complete these are totally up to them. But a really important message here is, if you're attending these events, you're going to CPD, which is, first of all, subject specific, but secondly, is really, really impactful to your own needs. A school can't offer this. A researchED, for example, can have up to 60 to 70 sessions on. A school can't compete with this, and so it makes sense to try and access these resources, but in a way which doesn't ask teachers to give up their own time. So the next part was to ask teachers to decide upon what area they'd like to focus on. Rob Co has a great teaching framework, which is where we base all of our teaching, assessment and CPD on, and it has 6 core strands, and on the PowerPoint here you can see 2, so subject knowledge and quality of instruction. There are another 4, but we decided to ask our teachers to fill this in. And the reason we did that is because a lot of our teachers, when just asked find something to focus on, struggled. They really needed some kind of guidelines to maybe help them establish where they should put their focus. And so this essentially just broke down the Great Teaching Framework into 4 or 5 questions. This was given to teachers at the start of the year. We did not ask to see this. We did not ask this to be in. This was for their use only. And they just quickly, 2 or 3 minutes it took, they just ticked whatever they thought they were in that strand. But what that did in a couple of minutes was give them a very visual image of maybe areas which they felt they needed development in, and areas that they felt they were strong in. And that started to get their thinking going about maybe where they could focus their attention in the CPD model, which was going to happen for that year. So once the audit was completed, they started to choose where they would put their focus. But I'm going to ask you a question now. A lot easier when I have a room full of people, but still I think it's a really important question. So you've now done your audit. You've got an area of development, and you've got an area of strength. What would you focus on? Would you focus on the development, or would you try and develop a strength further? I'm going to give you 30 seconds. Okay, so I would normally take responses, and it often promotes an interesting debate. But I'd argue quite a lot of people, teachers especially, naturally go towards a development. And I think in one way it is right. If you have something which fundamentally needs improving, I think you need to raise any area of that Great Teaching Framework to a certain level. And that would make sense to me. But once you get to a certain level, I'm really interested in this idea of developing strength further. And Doug Lemov's book, Practice Perfect, really got me thinking on this. And he posed an interesting question. When he did his rounds of looking at some outstanding teachers who were getting brilliant results. He often expected to find a really strong all-rounder, but he never did. He found a teacher who was brilliant in one or two moments. And so his argument fell back on the argument of, do we need to try and make everything great, or do we need to just really hone parts of our practice which are our strengths and make them even better? And the example he gave was a teacher who he said wasn't really organized, didn't have a great level of subject knowledge, but had the ability to form relationships with students like he'd never seen before. And he said these students would work for him harder than any other teacher. And he said that was his strength. And with that in mind, that was what he needed to focus and improve on. And it kind of comes back to just generic principles of improvement. So someone like Cristiano Ronaldo in football, at what point does he stop trying to make his left foot as good as his right foot? And at what point does he just say, do you know what? My right foot is one of the best in the world, and I'm going to make this so good that I'm able to become the best player in the world. And he's raised his left foot to maybe a standard which is required for his profession, but his left foot isn't as good as his right foot, and it never will be. So why waste time on that when you can make that right foot even better? And that really got me thinking, and it got our teachers thinking about at what point do we maybe move away from the development and go for that strength. So this was taken from David Weston and Bridget Clay's book, and I've just turned it into a Word document. But this is what we ask our teachers to think about before they start. So we ask them to explicitly say what they will do, what the learner will do and because, and how it'll be evaluated. Now, this is really, really important. And the reason it's important is because quite often people start a CPD journey and then about 4, 5, 6, 7 weeks down the line realize that it isn't really going to affect students, and it's really, really hard to evaluate. So what this allows us to do is allows us to set up from the start how it will be evaluated and what the learners will do because of the CPD. And then if there is any issues around evaluation or learners, then it can be tackled straight away, and we can not waste the time which has elapsed on the CPD, which has happened. When we talk about that weaving and we talk about coming back, each term we come back to it and we say, well, this is what we wanted to happen, what happened? And as a result, what was our assessment? So what happened by that CPD? And at the bottom, we have this idea of, do we continue? Because quite often CPD isn't just neatly fitted into a term, so you can continue it or you can adapt and change it. Because sometimes throughout the year, you can maybe think, you know what, I've hit the standard I wanted to for that part of the CPD, and there's now something else going off which I really want to put my attention to. So that bottom line just allows us to make sure that the CPD that we're embarking on is going to be effective. So engaging with the profession. So we've kind of had the idea of Pink's drivers. Well, how do we kind of get that buy-in? So all faculties are allowed to sign up to a subject association of their choice, and they email me what I'd like to sign up to, and we sign them up for free. In our school, we have the test magazine. We have schools week email out to our staff every week. We have the researchED mags brought in, put into our staff room. And hopefully what we've seen is we're really starting to kind of enrich the environment with CPD opportunities. We have a staff library where I've bought 80 books, which can be used for CPD purposes. But we also ask our teachers to email any books which they've heard about, which they'd really be interested in reading, and we buy those as well, again trying to promote that engagement in CPD. All of our NQTs are signed up to the Chartered College of Teaching, and I know that the Chartered Colleges has some critics, but for me, any institution which is trying to improve the teaching of the profession and the opportunities to engage in CPD, I'm all for. And so that is to try and induct our CPDs into an institution which allows them to develop their CPD. And then finally, sorry, my video is covering that, but bursaries for all staff are available, and that can be a master's, the Chartered College of Teaching program, or it can be knowledge enhancement. And importantly, if we want our teachers to embark on some CPD outside of school, where possible, budget possible, obviously, we try and support our teachers in doing that. So I'm going to ask you a second question now. So we've got all these books in our library, but what is better for your professional development? So which book would you choose out of these three for professional development? I'm going to give you 30 seconds to have a think about what book you think is better for professional development. Okay, so once again, the discussion would help here, but I'm going to talk about maybe the overarching ideas that I can get back. So quite often people choose one or two, but normally by the end of the discussion, we get to this idea that none of them are as more important than the other, and it's more dependent on what you want to improve on. So I am not trained as an English teacher, but I teach English. And so the book that I decided to focus on this year was the first book on Shakespeare's language, as I was delivering Shakespeare. And whilst I feel quite confident on it, I really wanted to engage with some of the ideas around it and the writing around it. So that for me was developing my subject knowledge of Shakespeare. So really important for me. Some of our teachers, few NQTs, for example, at the start of their journey are looking around just basics of behaviour management. And so quite often for that teacher, it might be Bill Rogers' book. And then finally, Hirsch's book, maybe for someone who is looking at maybe curriculum for their CPD strand. And this would give them maybe ideas about whole school CPD, or maybe a knowledge-rich curriculum, and maybe give them some support in developing that. But importantly, again, there is no right answer to this. It's more about what are your needs as an individual teacher. So lastly, I'm going to talk to you about our observation framework. So it looks unwieldy, and I will do my best to talk you through this. But interestingly for us, we surveyed our teachers, and one thing we found was that our teachers said they didn't get enough observation. So we were really conscious a couple of years ago about observations not really being too reliable, and so we scaled back. But what we found is our teachers actually wanted more. I'd like to think this is because maybe the culture that we've built in the school, where it isn't about judgment, it's more about development. But because of that, we decided to change our observation approach. So just to kind of talk you through it very quickly, the grey boxes are our SLT team, and our SLT team work with faculties to observe, practice. And this, you could argue, is our quality assurance. But importantly, I am line manager for English, Science, and PE and Health. And so when I'm doing my observations of science, before I do that, I talk with the faculty leader of science, because I don't want to just go in there. I really want it to be effective for the teachers and effective for myself. And so we often talk about, well, this is what we're going to focus on this term or this half term, and this is kind of when I'm going to come. We don't want it to be anything that teachers panic about. We want it to be developmental. I'm going to move across to the blue strand next, because this is second easiest to explain. This is our faculty. So in old models, you'd have SLT being the kind of main drivers of observation. We've removed this and we've given a lot more to our faculties. So we found that it's a lot better for an English teacher to observe other English teachers, as opposed to an SLT maths teacher observing English. And so whilst we want our SLT strand to stay, we've given more independence to our faculties to observe within the faculty. And this isn't just the faculty leader observing their teachers, the teachers observe the faculty leader. This isn't hierarchical. But what it does, it really develops a discussion around the subject as opposed to generic features which you tend to focus on if you aren't engaged in the subject discipline. The purple box is our sharing good practice, and we have an open door policy in the school, but only for teachers who want to engage with that. And so you are invited to post your timetable or certain lessons onto a master timetable, and teachers walk in and out of classrooms and just give some brief feedback over email. But this only involves people who wish to sign up to it. And then the orange strand is something which is new this year. And this is something I'm going to talk about more on the next couple of slides. But this is kind of our CPD strand. So you'll notice that we have our boxes here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. The sixth strand this is from Rob Coe's Great Teaching Framework. The sixth strand is professional behaviours, and we didn't feel that was observable, so we removed that. But what happens here is once a term, we have a peer observation. And what I mean by peer observation is teachers sign up to one of these. So you sign up to one of those, you have a session on some ideas about how you could maybe work on, let's say, classroom management or instruction. And then as a peer, you say, I'm going to work on this, and can you as a peer observe me on this? It's really important that this is non-judgmental and it's a peer observation as opposed to an SLT or a faculty leader. And so here we are just trying to get our teachers to engage in practice and review. So once every term, a teacher signs up to a certain session, gets a session delivered, and then are observed on one thing that they choose to focus on. And I'm going to try and show you how that would look now. So let's say you sign up for classroom management. Well, if you sign up for classroom management, this was the PowerPoint that was delivered to you. And you can see things like brighten the lines, strong start, circulation, warm strict. And we've kind of taken these from Teach Like a Champion, Get Better Faster in 30 Days. And we've just offering a few ideas maybe about how you can improve your classroom management. But what's really important here is these are just guidelines. And quite often, the idea is teachers start to investigate their own strategies. But as a starter, we give them some opportunities, we give them some guidance on maybe what they can do. So this will be delivered to you. And let's say you choose circulate. So if you choose circulate, this is what you would do. So your top box, you would just say classroom management. What strategy idea are you going to implement, which is here? You'd write circulate. Now, this is the most important part, and this is how we try and get it away from judgmental, and we try and alleviate the idea of it maybe not being a subject expert. You write, the person being observed, what you're going to do. So if it's circulate, I'm going to make sure that I walk around the class as opposed to staying behind the desk. And I'm going to make sure that I stand in certain areas where there are opportunities for students to become off task. What should the students do? So if I stand next to a group of students, I expect the noise level to reduce due to my presence. And then all the observer does is a yes, partially, or no. That's it. You meet after the observation and have a quick discussion. So this is what I saw, this is what I felt, and then the person being observed writes that up. It's really important that the observer doesn't write it up. The person observed writes up their own interpretation of the observation, again, to kind of really reinforce the idea that's all about development. So last but not least is our faculty level. So we've kind of spoken about whole school, we've spoken about individual, now we're going to look at faculty level. And again, this quotation comes back about it being subject specific. So what does it look like? Well, they get one CPD day, all unnecessary meetings have been removed. We finished our school day 40 minutes earlier on a Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday. So we have been really, really efficient with our time in the day. But what this has allowed us to do is it's allowed us to give our staff back 40 minutes or 3 days a week, which we like them to use for CPD. And also we've removed meetings. So when I first started, there was a meeting every week. We now have a meeting once every half term, because quite often we found those meetings just information giving and not really effective. The reason we've done this is obviously to create more time for faculty CPD. So this was a blog written over a year ago by curriculum team leader, but this is something which really resonated with what we were moving towards, which was that if you're going to have a meeting, let's make sure it's effective. Because I know personally, I've sat in so many meetings which could have been an email, and we often say that to teachers: if it could be an email, send it as an email. Do not go through a tick list, wasting everyone's time, because quite often you will find that some of our larger faculties like science, which has 8 teachers in it, you're still wasting an hour times 8 hours for essentially what could be sent over an email, which could be read in their own time when they're ready. What we do ask our meetings now to look more like is sharing knowledge. So one thing that's always baffled me as a profession is, for example, in English, we have people who have specialised in certain parts of English, and then we teach that subject, and we teach that topic, and we don't ask that teacher to maybe do a CPD session before. So we have some of our teachers who specialise in Shakespeare or Gothic novellas, and what we don't do is we don't ask them to maybe share that wealth of knowledge before we teach the actual topic. So one thing we've asked our staff to start doing is to start sharing knowledge. Also co-planning, so we know that's really, really effective, especially for some of our novice teachers. And so if there is a topic which we know is a difficult one to teach, we can come together as a group and we can co-plan. Equally, we can review work where as a faculty, we might look at a few assessments and work out why one teacher has got a better outcome than the other. And it could be simply how they present the material, or it could be maybe just a little tweak to teaching, which can be improved next time. And then lastly, build some knowledge. So quite often now we're asking our faculties to start to look at blogs, look at webinars, look at chapters from books, and start to discuss as a faculty around a table how can they improve their knowledge of their teaching. So this is online, as is all of our kind of CPD logs and measures. But just to give you a quick idea of what it might look like, if I go to English first, one of our meetings was looking at this blog, which was looking at paragraphing and whether it's effective. In the past, we've used Perl, but we've kind of moved away from that now. But some of the thinking behind this was based on this blog. And also, we had Click Dickens, our English department invited Click Dickens in to share some of the work they've been doing around online corpuses, which the English department found really interesting. If I quickly go across to humanities, then they shared a podcast which they listened to and then discussed. And then history shared from a blog, I think it was by Bailey Watson, I forgot his first name, which is really off for me. Really, really great on Twitter. But Meanwhile Elsewhere, which they now have embedded fully into their curriculum, but before they did that, they looked at the blog, they looked at what he suggested, and then they built that into their curriculum. But hopefully what you're seeing here is they're not talking about what day does the data have to be in. They're not talking about a marking policy. What they're talking about is ways to improve their subject knowledge and ways to improve their teaching. And hopefully this small sample gives you a flavour of that. Okay, so the last part of the faculty CPD model I'd like to share is ownership. So I've been quite a big driver of this, developing, asking people to come in. But this year, actually a suggestion from one of our faculty leaders was they would like to maybe have a bigger involvement, and so we've really embraced this. And what you can see here is you can see different people being invited in. So, for example, maths invited Don Stewart in. And this was totally arranged by our Key Stage 3 maths leader, nothing to do with me at all. She set up her own Eventbrite page, and we have 55 attendees from different schools come and access that session. One thing we're really keen to do is really kind of embrace this idea of a collective CPD journey, and we buy in this CPD, so Don Stewart, Ben Walsh, but we invite all schools in for free. The reason we do this is because it costs us no more money to have 4 people listen to it as it does 50 people listen to it, and so in terms of financially, it doesn't cost any more. But over time, we would like to get this developing into a model where schools are maybe asking someone to come in and they're inviting the local schools in the area to attend. I just think there's so much to be gained from pooling resources when it comes to things like this. But hopefully what you can see is we've already got several of our subjects really engaging with this and inviting people into the school to deliver subject-specific CPD, but also to improve the understanding not only of our school, but of local schools in the area. Okay, so as I come to the end of the session, I just want to maybe talk about the impact, because quite often you have all these ideas shared with you, but I think it's really important that maybe we look at the impact. Now, before I go through this, I want to make it clear that I don't think that this CPD model alone is the reason for the impacts that I'm going to share with you, but I would like to think that the overall culture and the CPD model we have in place has added to some of the information I'm going to share with you. So firstly, after the first year of doing this model, we asked our teachers if they prefer this model or would like to go back to the old model, and as you can see, 100% prefer the new model. So first off, it's more effective, it's more research-based, and now your teachers prefer it. So that's a win right there for me. Engagement has in CPD events has increased exponentially. So we ask our teachers to do 1 or 2 a year. If I can honestly say to you now that our teachers do more than this. It wasn't the case in the first year, and quite often teachers that I've never been to that, I don't know what it is. But the feedback from our teachers is that once you get a taste for this, you actually want to go to more. So once you've been to one researchED or one West London Free Schools history conference, you really then start to go, wow, this is amazing CPD, I want more of it. And so this year, which is kind of the most recent year, with 80% of our staff have already completed their CPD expectations by March. And the reason being that they're really buying into it and they're seeing the benefit, and they're now doing more CPD than they need to do, which again just adds to the kind of idea of the engagement with the model. Development around the curriculum is enriched with high subject knowledge, and so now if you walk around our building after school, it's a privilege to just listen to the conversations that are happening. We're discussing blogs, we're discussing chapters from books, we're looking at podcasts, and it's all talking about how we can develop our curriculum and how we can develop our teaching. But the level of conversation now has really gone up, and it's lovely to see. In terms of buy-in, the first session I ran had 4 teachers attend, which was fine. Our last one had 32. We only have 41 staff at this school, so a huge change in buy-in. And again, I think this has got something to do with the journey we've gone on, the culture we're building, and the fact that teachers are now really wanting to engage with the CPD. 35 out of our 43 teachers, I said 41, whoops, sorry about that. 35 out of our 35 out of our 43 teachers are here today, which is amazing. This, when I say here today, this was my presentation from researchED Birmingham, which we hosted, and it was just a real moment for me to see how many of our teachers engaging with the CPD on offer. CPD expenditure has decreased, which is an interesting one. But a question I pose to you is, we often see these CPD opportunities come up from things like Azaris, how to get grade 9 in English, and the cost of them are £400–500. You then need to cover that teacher at the cost of £250. So you're looking at a £750 spend there. £750 spend for one teacher to go on one CPD event. researchEDs across the country. Another one in Birmingham, which we hosted, was £25. So here I am testing my maths. So we've got 4 for 100, 28 for 700, 30, I believe, but I'm no maths teacher. But for £750, you get 30 teachers going to researchED, or you can get one teacher going to an Azaris London conference on grade 9. And very quickly, you can maybe appreciate just exactly how our spend goes down. And because of our spend reduced in that area, that's why we could afford to invite in Mark Roberts. That's why we could afford to invite in Oliver Caviglioli, and why we can afford to invite in all our subject-specific teachers such as Ben Walsh and Don Stewart, because we've actually got more money to spend. And lastly, we are currently in the top 2% for Progress 8, and we're in the top 10% for Attainment 8. And so, whilst again, I wouldn't say this is directly related to the CPD model alone, I do feel that the conversations and the teaching which has taken place has been significantly improved through the model. Okay, so lastly, we were privileged to write about part of our CPD model in Tom Sherrington's field book. And so if you would like to find out some more information about the CPD model, then there is a written version in there for you to access. So thank you everyone for your time. It's my first time online presenting using Loom, which has been a wonderful software. But thank you for listening and joining me at the end of the presentation if you got here. Enjoy the rest of your day and enjoy the rest of the sessions. I know I will be. Thank you very much.